My name's Chris Hamilton. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of BankservAfrica. Swift's African Regional Conference is a great opportunity for us in two different ways. The first way is it's a source of opportunity to meet and talk to people in Africa who do what we do and who do what our clients do. So it's a great networking opportunity in a straightforward way. But actually it's important in another way too, which is it's a great opportunity for us all to learn something about what we do, what the new trends are, where's the innovation, what's the next big thing. Africa's tricky because it's large and complicated, and the African representation at the global forums on payments is not very large. And I think that's because it's expensive to go to Europe and those sorts of things. So ARC is by far the best place for that. BankservAfrica put the workshop together, talked to McKinsey, talked to Swift, and it hasn't been done before. The idea is that right now, across the continent, there are literally dozens of countries who are looking at how they can improve their payment systems so as to support their developing economies. That turns out to be a complicated issue, and it's not one where there's a huge body of expertise that you can immediately apply. So we all need to learn from each other to pool the best knowledge that we have and have a good discussion about it. I think it's probably fair to say there is more payment system development going on in Africa than anywhere else in the world right now because the economies are all developing and putting this infrastructure in. The idea of the workshop is to start that conversation. What is happening in different countries? Why have they made the design choices that they have? Is that the right thing for everybody, or is there a difference in the economy which leads to a different outcome? If it works really well, it'd be nice to see it as an ongoing conversation. Perhaps we could have regular workshops and so forth. The idea is to attract anyone who's interested in the design of the national payment system for a given country. Now, the obvious candidates are the central banks of each country, and usually the central bank has some kind of statutory mandate to improve the payment system or to develop the payment system. But we also find that the banking associations and sometimes payment associations in the different countries are very interested in this topic because they've got to propose to their members how the payment system is going to develop. And then senior bankers are going to be interested from the perspective of what does this mean for my bank in the long term. If the system isn't there to support the bank as it expands, then it's going to find that as a constraint. So those are probably the biggest categories. Then beyond that, there are large corporate users, there are, everybody touches the payment system eventually. The logic is that there is just so much happening in Africa at the moment to support these rapidly developing economies. That's the first thing. But then the other thing that's happening, which is more a global phenomenon, is that a whole lot of new technology is becoming available for payment systems. So it's a bit hard to know what the best thing to do is. There's too much, almost too much development going on. Nearly all of the developed economies have built or are building real-time payment systems, for example, as a next generation of payments infrastructure. So that sounds like something we should all be having a look at. But then there are more early stage ideas, and no one's quite clear yet how important they're going to be, like blockchain-based solutions, for example. So the challenge is to start to bring all those ideas in and pool them and talk a little bit about what's the most important thing to think about, how can we help the economies of Africa. So our long history, we're a 42-year-old company, and for all of that time we've essentially played a central role in the national payment system of South Africa. That's what we do. We support the economic plumbing, if you like, of South Africa. So it's natural for us to be interested in the evolution and development of payment systems. South Africa has been blessed with one of the most, if not the most advanced payments infrastructure in Africa in recent history, but as I mentioned before, there's this wave of technology change happening. We can't afford to simply stay the way we are. We have to keep investing in those ideas and thinking about how we can make use of them. So this is as much an opportunity for us as it is for everyone else. We are the technological and operational plumbing for the South African payment system. If you go online to pay money out of your bank account to someone else, if you walk up to an ATM, if you pull out your card in a shop, chances are the transaction that occurs from those actions, the electronic transaction, will pass over our switch and our connections between the banks. So we're not a bank, but we do connect all the banks up. And there are many, many different ways in which payments occur, but most often BankServ is the sort of the glue that holds the payment system together. So we're kind of a bit like an iceberg. We're not very visible, but there's a lot going on sort of underneath, right? There are some really important developments coming out of technological development, and you hear that term fintech a lot these days. Part of it is just pure technology opportunity. There are ways to do things better than we did them before, ways to automate things that used to be manual. And it's important just to stay in touch with those developments to understand how you can use the opportunity. There's also a market structure challenge there too. The role of a traditional bank is itself changing as new technology allows people to pull apart the elements of what used to be thought of as a bank and do them separately. So a company like PayPal is, in a sense, the transactional part of a bank. It doesn't do the deposit and the lending, but it does the transactions. And those kind of developments are happening a lot. So mobile is very important in payments. It's very important in everything, I think. I think the statistic is that by 2020, 50% of phones will be smartphones, and of course the capability of the smartphone goes way beyond the core voice and SMS type capabilities. So the way people access financial services generally is probably going to be mobile driven in some way in coming years. So although we don't touch the end customer most of the time, we're the plumbing that connects the banks, they then touch the end customer. Understanding how the banks are going to serve customers through the mobile channel is going to be very important for us, because the payment system has to support that. Things like if you're doing your payments now, instead of by walking into a branch or writing a cheque, but rather by pressing a button on an app on your phone, then the speed at which the transaction takes place, the richness of the data that's electronically flowing through the wires, become much more important, because that app can do a whole lot more than the checkbook can. So it stands to reason that we're going to have to understand those developments in order to make sure the payment system delivers. What we think of as a very separate type of payment, using a card in a terminal, will evolve to look a lot more like what's happening in electronic payments. So it won't be a card anymore, it'll be a bug on your phone. You won't stick your phone into a terminal, you'll wave it over the terminal, or you'll press the button on the phone. So the difference between cards as a way of doing payments and other things as a way of doing payments is probably going to reduce over time. The term low value payments usually refers to routine payments that aren't large corporate treasury payments. So my salary coming through every week, my regular insurance payment, my my TV license, all of those sort of routine bill type payments, they're what people normally think of as low value payments. The distinction is drawn because there are two other main types of payments. First one is those big corporate treasury payments where large companies are paying each other very significant amounts of money. And then there's also all of the consumer payments, which are often but not always card payments. So that's I go into a shop and I buy something. I think that there are so many new technologies coming forward now that there's unlikely to be a one-size-fits-all solution. So the name of the game is going to be flexibility, it's going to be compare and contrast, and I genuinely think different economies are likely to find different solutions work better for them. So there'll be some similar characteristics, but there's no particular reason to assume that the way it works in, say, Canada or the US or Australia is the right way for any African country. If we can take someone who doesn't currently have access to a range of financial services, they can't get credit, they might not even be able to get a bank account, and we can give them access to those things, then that enables them to live their lives more fully. They might be able to start up a business, they might be able to help someone who needs help. That there are a whole lot of opportunities that then open up for them. So the small specific answer is the man in the street who may not have full access to financial services gets them, financial inclusion, if you will. But there's a much bigger opportunity there, which is if you can make the economy overall work that bit more efficiently, then opportunities open up over the long term, simply because the economy itself finds it easier to grow and diversify. So while I suppose the person in the street's not going to see that immediately and straight away, it's going to matter over the long term. I suppose the only observation I'd make is we have one massive challenge in Africa that I think is unique, which is the sheer complexity of the continent. 48, I think, odd countries, enormous range of cultures, languages, connection points, and widely differing levels of economic development across the continent as well. So I think one of the things we're going to have to take into account as we have this African payments conversation is how are we going to try and work across that complexity? How are we going to bring people together? And I think there's a lot of interesting opportunities to do that.